Good morning, everybody. Appreciate your coming out for the second of our online workshops. These workshops we've been doing since we started our CX forums, and the thinking was, once we're together in person, then we can go deeper learning online, and people can join us from anywhere. These are complimentary for anyone who wants to join. Today, I'd like to introduce our special guest, and that is Valerie Peck. She is the managing director of Suite CX by Question Pro. And Valerie created Suite CX as a great technology solution for journey mapping and such. And today she's going to give share her wisdom about partnering with other departments to drive positive outcomes. So Valerie, I'll let you take it away from here and all yours.
Great. Hi, everybody. Happy Friday. Chime right in if you have a question, because I'm going to go through this. Now, I do have a deck of pretty detailed slides, and I'll get that to Mark at the end of this so that he can share it to the team should they want, and also a recording. I have a habit of doing very busy, deep slides just because I like it so people can share it around after the fact. But I am going to make this extremely interactive, and I want everybody to ask as many questions as they'd like. And I will apologize in advance. I'm babysitting two dogs that are not of my tribe. And one is the devil slipper dog. And he looks like a little cotton ball running around, but he is mean, so he may bark. So I'll apologize in advance. So what we're going to talk a little bit about today is the fact that customer experience is really a fundamental strategy in companies who really embrace it. And Carl had a really good session just before this for anybody who was on that, frankly, around the maturity of CX. And, interestingly enough, I have been doing something like CX for almost 25 years. It was called customer relationship management, customer experience management, one-to-one marketing. Essentially, if you take your customer and your insights and knowledge around them and apply it to the strategy and design and execution of your business, you will be better off than if you don't. So the challenge now that customer experience has become a bit of its own thing is that organizations now are tending to form around it. So you'll see centers of excellence, you'll see CX with a couple groups of architects and other individuals, so that it hasn't really solidified as a typical department like marketing, sales, the typical finance and operations group. So it's been growing over the past few years, and it's taking a lot of forms. And one of the things that has been really obvious over the years is that if the CX team is a department of another department, a lot of times marketing, or is kind of off to the side, it doesn't have the impact that it really should and could have. And therefore, in down times, it's one of the ones, along with some of the other less directly impacting the things not impacting revenue, that get cut. So what we're going to dive right into is how to make yourselves more useful, more inclusive, and more impactful to the other organizations that theoretically should be supporting customer experience, but generally it's sometimes the other way around. That makes sense? So one of the things, I have a whole pre-mumble in the deck that you can, I'll share with Mark about why it's important, with a lot of statistics around best practices and the companies who are actually engaging customer insight and how much better they're doing from all aspects. But I figured that I'd just jump right in. And the first thing that you want to know is know your target audience, right? So what keeps the different departments' leaders up at night? So that's what we're going to talk about first. So a chief marketing officer is usually most excited about improving the customer experience. They kind of get it, right? They're very customer centric in general. And, they understand that the experience is essential to the organization. However, they are in trouble today because their budgets were cut to the bone in 2008. So that huge dive in 2008 brought the rise of a lot of different organizations. The mobile teams, the web teams, the social teams all tend to be sprouted up as their own independent things, and far less of them are nested under marketing anymore. So they don't have the power they used to, and they need to figure out how to do a better job of getting back at that table. So that kept them up a lot. There's a lot of shadow IT groups popping up. And what a shadow IT group is, and I don't know if any of you guys have this, is that it takes a really long time now to get marketing initiatives off the ground, especially ones that have to have technology to support them. So if they've got to have journey orchestration tools or a customer database, what they do is they go to their friendly neighborhood agency and they say, can you build this for me and license it back to me so it doesn't look like IT? So those are popping up all over the place, and it makes it very difficult from a customer experience perspective to influence somebody who's a third party, essentially. And then all of you who are familiar with privacy and regulation, especially financial institutions, telcos, and regulatory dependent companies, find it very difficult now with all of the different restrictions around getting customer level information. So those are some of the things that I have seen. What are you all seeing in your organizations that keep your CMO up at night? Because we're going to talk about how we're going to fix that in a minute. Anybody? Are you going to be a quiet group? Okay, I'm going to go on if it's quiet, or you can always stick something in chat if you're shy, and Mark will pick it up. Yep. Can everyone hear me okay? You good?
Yes.
Okay.
Thumbs up.
Great. So now, next, how about sales and technology? What keeps those folks up at night, right? So if you've got a chief growth officer, a VP of sales, they also have a vested interest in the customer experience. They need to increase sales growth and profit. They're really single-mindedly focused on acquisition. And they tend to forget that the customer experience impacts repurchase and growth. I've done a number of projects, especially in high tech, where it is as or more important to maintain that product, to have the customer success team successfully ongoing relationship management, as Carl was mentioning in the last session, having a program around transactional and relationship metrics is really important. But oftentimes they are focused so solely on lead generation and then acquisition that they forget that references and ongoing information is impacted all through the net. And nowadays, if you've got somebody with a complaint, that information gets spread, especially in B2B, really quickly. And they don't often see how the overall customer experience improvements also have a big impact on the sales cycle. It could speed it up, it could slow it down. So understanding all of that is a little difficult for them. Again, they're trying to keep acquisition to the front, and that's what oftentimes CFOs are looking at as well. If you look at the chief information or IT officer, they're usually now in charge of digital channels. So it seems logical for a lot of companies to throw all their digital channels and digital transformation into the technology infrastructure budget and oversight. So that then results in data collection taking place outside the normal wheelhouse of the peoples who need it, meaning sales, marketing, and customer success. And digital channels start taking a life of their own, right? So they get outside attention, they get a lot of feedback. So they're worried about making sure the user experience is good. And a lot of people confuse user experience and customer experience. So I'm going to take a moment. How many of you all know the difference between user experience and customer experience?
Wasn't user experience a part of customer experience?
Bless you. Indeed. So a user, so keep going, tell me more.
Oh, I mean, if you were to put it into a hierarchy chart, customer experience would be at the top. User experience would be more down in the hierarchy chain. And typically it's referred to things in the digital space. UI and UX tend to go together. You're on mute.
Sorry, I muted so that it could hear you better. So yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, the customer's experience is the end-to-end experience, whereas UX tends to be more product or functionally focused. But how many of you on this team actually have the CX team reporting to the UX team? I walk into a lot of clients that have that. So, and then the same vote, there's a lot of people who UX and CX don't necessarily collaborate. And one of the tips that I have always had is for the teams that collaborate, when you have a map of what the customer's expectations are, it doesn't even have to be a fancy journey map, just the key things that a customer expects as they go through, especially acquisition. And then you paste the user experience, meaning what screens they're seeing as they go through the acquisition process online. 80% of them, their call to action, their triggers, and their timing are in the wrong spot. They're beautiful. They're just engaging and they're in the wrong spot. So you do one or two of those with the user experience group and the CX team together, and suddenly collaboration comes a lot easier. So that'll be your first tip of the day. So if you can get in on that, that is something that is pretty magical. So I'm going to move on because we don't have a ton of time, and talk a little bit about the next group, HR. Now, HR is a really interesting group. They don't meaningfully go in every day and say, we're going to mess up the customer experience. They actually usually embrace the fact that, again, and Carl had a great discussion about this, not necessarily happy employees, even though engaged employees tend to be happier. An engaged employee with a clear remit and enablement to satisfy the customer is generally much happier and much more effective than one who is not, right? So what they do is they stay up at night worrying about how to keep their talent, right? Especially in some of the groups that walk out the door every day. So if you are dealing in any of the professional services, high technology, or frontline employee heavy companies like banks and telco, every day their intellectual property, their intellectual capital all walks out the door. And it is incredible how unemployment, who is now roughly the lowest it's been in 18 years. People are still fighting to get best customers, and they're spending money. One of my young women that I mentor has moved from her first to second job. She doubled her salary overnight, and it was pretty amazing. And with the skills she learned in her first job. So, according to IDC, and 85% of companies found that improved EX and higher employee engagement translates to better CX. So there's tons of things we'll talk about there. Generally under HR is also change management and user adoption. So who knows the difference between user acceptance, user adoption, and change management? Anyone want to jump in?
I just have a question.
Uh-huh.
Because I'm not in the HR space. My question's around, there's HR organizations out there, you can get credentials and so on. How much of that notion has permeated within and throughout the HR profession and these associations to embrace this more than, let's say, it is today?
Great question. Again, in the really competitive companies where they're fighting every day to keep their customers because they have to, you'll find generally more enlightenment in HR, right? So the combination of highly competitive industries with the staff walking out the door every day and not having a ton of things. One of the do you know what a golden question is? One of the questions you might ask to immediately know that is, gee, do you have a knowledge management system? If a company has a knowledge management system, meaning even a SharePoint repository where people can go for help, the HR department is generally involved and generally more enlightened than somebody who isn't. So I would say, and Mark, you probably see this more than most folks, I'd say about half of the Fortune 50 are getting more enlightened because it costs them a lot of money to replace employees. So if they're engaged, that's good. And I would say 60 to 70% of the people who I do consulting with, their HR departments are part of the team that is doing the customer experience work. So it's better, but it's still far away, right? Because again, when HR reports into facilities, that's a golden question of, oops, run the other direction. That help?
Yeah, the other thought that comes to mind on that is it would seem that in order for that to move forward, whether it's internal or external, having an OD&L component to that would be a critical.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the questions I often ask people, there's kind of two parts of what HR does, right? The first part is, am I happy at my job? Am I getting onboarded? Do I get trained and supported and all that? But the other piece, which is very CX oriented, is, am I enabled and empowered to do the job you expect me to do? And in a couple of slides from now, you'll see a statement of intent exercise that's really good at exposing that. That makes sense? Okay. Onto the CFO and CEO. Okay, these are kind of the two toughest nuts. The CFO obviously is all about money, 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 money. She needs to be convinced that the work you do has bottom line results. They focus mostly on business benefits, shareholder value. If you're a startup, are you making enough money so that you can get the next mezzanine or first tier financing, right? So it goes all the way through. A CFO is usually like the second person after even an entrepreneur is hired in a smaller company. So they stay awake all night worrying about three things. Am I getting enough money to do the job we need to do? Am I keeping my profit margin high enough? And interestingly enough, reducing risk. So one of the back doors that always worries them is how much risk I'm taking in my business. And oftentimes the customer experience side doesn't really understand that part. So that we'll talk about in a minute. And then if you can do some of the things, and this is a tip and we'll reiterate it in a minute, to help be self-funding, then you're not asking for a lot of money until you establish a track record. Then you'll get the CFO on your side really quickly. Now the CEO worries about everything, right? Is everybody going to be able to work together? Am I on a right trajectory? What's my competition doing? They worry about their stock price. You know, in the US especially, everyone has moved to this 90-day cycle, which is very harmful for strategy because they're looking for every 90 days, they have to chalk up whether or not they're worthy enough in the market. And the more disengaged the market becomes from reality, which is, what the face and high-tech world has done, it makes them even more crazy because they can't figure out what's going to actually help them move the needle, right? So they worry about all of that. And, we talk about, again, Carl had the same comment, I think, in his session, 86% of customers have already stopped doing business with a company after a single negative experience, because there really isn't a lot of companies, not a lot of differentiation. Comments, questions?
I have a question. Hi, this is Igor. So about the 86% of customers. So I'm completely new to CX. I come from UX and software engineering field. But how realistic is it to be able to prevent a customer stopping doing business with you? If you only had, if the customer only had one negative experience. So my question is, would it be would it be more realistic to worry about and focus on the resolution? How do you go back and fix that problem realistically?
Exactly. Now, this is very dependent on your company. If you're a B2B company and you're trying, so I just did some work for a major building supply company that their average transactional value was 6 figures, right? So if they're not having a great experience, you should know about it while it's not happening first and do something proactive. But another interesting statistic is if you follow up with somebody who is falling off, and I'm doing a lifetime value class actually in July, if you're looking at companies who should be best customer models and they're falling off or they're shrinking, if you jump in and do a find and fix program, they become 70% more loyal. So you can recover these. Now, if you're bleeding like Comcast was bleeding a number of years ago, bleeding customers because AT&T or someone would come in and be competitive in their market, that's a lot harder because you're bleeding volume, right? It takes a little longer to fix the processes and understand the triggers of people leaving. But if the bigger your company base, the bigger your ability to have a customer feedback loop in your voice of the customer program, you can do a large number of things to, again, intervene and win them back. And that could be a subject for a whole course. I call them find and fix programs. That's the other thing that you can do pretty quickly when you jump into a new organization. A find and fix program, meaning understand the top 2 or 3 negative things that are happening and jumping in and fixing them, as well as going in and apologizing to the people who are dropping off. Oftentimes that's enough to get them to come back and give you a second chance.
What do you do, really quick follow-up, I don't want to, what do you do if you took care of apologizing and somehow patching that problem, but you have a bigger process to fix, and you know that tomorrow you're going to have another 1,000 people running into the same problem?
Yep. So so as part of a customer experience program, you should have several fingers on the pulse of what's going on with your customers, right? So if you're jumping in and you have to be reactive, which a lot of you are, as compared to having a journey map with moments of truth and pain points and formal projects that you're continuously improving on. If you see some hemorrhaging somewhere, immediately you should jump in there, study that particular area, think Six Sigma as a discipline, customer experience is almost the same discipline, continuous improvement, looking at what sticking points there are, tracking them down, and then collaborating with the team that's most responsible for the problem. That is the fastest way to put a finger in the dike, right? So if you're in B2B, customer success folks all know where their fingers are in the dike. They're the first people you talk to. In retail, in telco, in high tech, most of the frontline employees know where the problems are. So I would dive in with them and say, what are your top 3 issues that make people disengage with the company? And I guarantee you they will know them. And that's where you can spend your first time. If you're in some companies, they do proactive programs, vulnerability studies. When I work with telco, oftentimes, because they have so much data, they're just totally rich in data, as our financial institutions. You can go in and look at whether or not someone's plan or account is well suited for their particular segment or persona. And if it isn't, and you proactively say, hey, I noticed that you are paying for a program that's 3 times the data that you've used on average in the last 6 months. May I reduce that for you and reduce your costs? Or do you have a reason for it that you want to stay? Even if they stay, they become more loyal because you care about them. Make sense?
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other comments, questions?
Yeah, what was that study, that certain type of study you had commented on? What were the words you used?
A segmentation study, or a growing shrinking study, or keep going? Lifetime value?
No, it was after that. It was just within the last minute.
Okay, Mark, be my corporate memory.
I'm sorry, I can't. My memory is about the size of a mouse.
I know mine's
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, we'll get. We may get to it directly, and if anybody on the call can remember, jump in. Okay, and again, I can give you a lot of different ways of a find and fix study. Is that what you're thinking of?
No, it was after that. Something, this doesn't sound right. Opportunity study, but that wasn't it.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll go back and listen to the recording and I'll get back to you, Rick. Okay. So, the CXOs and the team really do have a big challenge, because almost all of the other departments have a definite remit. They've got a thing that they do. We have to look at everything, right? Acquisition, retention, and growth. And you'll hear me repeating acquisition, retention, and growth over and over, because Net Promoter Score, customer effort, and CSAT have no correlation to money. People have tortured this, all 3 of those, constantly to try to get them to tie directly to money. There is some correlation, but there's not a whole lot of causation. So as we go through here, optimizing the customer's journey, not just at the touch points, but across the entire experience, really does give you the competitive advantage. So now that we've done this, we're going to jump into some tactics and tools to support your efforts. Okay. So the first thing you have to do is get executive buy-in. Someone commented early on this particular session around who needs to be involved. HR needs to be involved. Everyone needs to be involved. But if your CEO is not actively interested and involved in the customer's experience, there is a very low likelihood that there's going to be long-term success. Sad but true. They have to be your biggest proponent. They have to fund you, and they really need to know that this effort is worth your while. And so minds can be changed and are changed often, but it really is important to make sure that you have your finger on the pulse of your CEO and CFO. So there's a lot of statistics in here around customers that excel customer experience, grow revenues 4 to 8% above their market. It is a key differentiator to lead increased ROI and stock purchase. You can reduce churn, increase loyalty, and decrease costs to acquire, all which impact both sales and marketing, right? And it ties to benefits to financial outcomes, right? So there's tons of data around this, and I can share that as well, or Mark will do a session and we can share more of it. But increased customer experience success directly ties to revenue on almost every single level, if you use the right metrics, right? And those metrics are acquisition, retention, and growth. So helping you get to a well-rounded approach of customer engagement or customer experience, whichever one you prefer to tie together, really takes a combination of functions. So the first thing is really understanding your customer, right? Understanding, Carl went into this from his service blueprint as well, having customer surveys, doing what I call outside in research. Some people call it mystery shopping, but mystery shopping tends to be quite a bit more, I just wander around and things happen and I document it. When you do true outside in research, you actually have all of the questions you want to have answered by an organized fashion, and you go through and do the research to make sure that you do that. So when you do it over and over along a period of time, you get a benchmark. Having voice of the customer, and importantly, voice of the employee. And that voice of the employee is really voice of the customer through the employee, because they've been aggregating information for years and hardly ever does anyone ask them what they're hearing and what they know. And then the CX maturity. And usually when I do CX maturity, I look at people, process, information, and technology, as well as culture, because those are the drivers that enable the employees to do the job you expect them to do. Experience mapping. I thought it was the dumbest thing on earth in 1999 when I first was faced with doing sticky notes on butcher paper at Peppers and Rogers. I thought people were dumb doing it. And now it's a core part of what we do, because it takes the linear data and the chunks of information from each department and channel, and it arrays it across the customer's life cycle against what the customer is expecting. And it enables you to take the focus off of each department pointing fingers at each other. And it allows you to understand where your channels are failing so that you can improve them. Engagement in governments, we've talked a lot about already, right? Understanding what needs to happen from a systemic and discipline-oriented focus versus I've done a map, I've done CES, I've done a survey, I'm done. And then for all you UX people on the line, process design, scenario planning, looking at what you're doing to and with your customers through digital transformation, and change management, most importantly, are all functions that you have to not necessarily master, but embrace and get a partner on your side from the rest of the company. So how many of you now are attempting to partner with different groups in the organization to get something holistic like this going? Any of you thinking about doing this as a, what I'll call a overarching SWAT group?
Yeah, we are over at Creedon, and we're approaching it a little bit differently. We're approaching it
Go tell.
A RevOps standpoint. So there's a lot of alignment. So I don't come from the CX world or industry, but there's a lot of things that I'm bringing from like a revenue operations standpoint that I've learned that align super well with what everything you talked about is essentially that. And it's really about bringing the customer to the forefront of the conversation versus an afterthought in it. And then from that comes all the operational aspects that you need to support that customer at a profitable standpoint, right? So that's our approach.
Yeah, I always lovingly say that I love having Six Sigma people in teams. All you have to do is give them an injection of emotion and voila, they become great customer experience folks.
Yeah. Not new ideas are shared amongst lots of different areas of the industries, different industries, right? So.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, I'm so old that I used to take the quality, I actually saw Deming and did his quality methodology, right? All of these methodologies and, you know, waves of things, good to great, all of these all end up being very similar at their root. Is if you understand your customer and you understand your company and you do a good job of figuring out what both want from each other, you will be successful.
Yeah, it's interesting too that it speaks differently to different groups of people, the framework you use, right? Like, so what, to your point, like RevOps isn't anything like out of the box new. It's like an iteration of this, but it speaks to that audience much better. So when I go to a sales when I go to salespeople or executives who are looking to get profit, if we talk about rev ops, they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. We're trying to drive revenue, so it's just an interesting twist.
Well, exactly. And, I was just doing a project for LabCorp, and one of the guys has a software tool that does value analysis, right? So along with service design, you get a lot of people doing value mapping. And I said, this is awesome. Let's paste the value map across the bottom of the journey map, and you will absolutely see where value is either added or detracted. And their face lit up. It's like, oh, she's open-minded. They said, well, whatever tool you have or whatever approach you have, if you can meld what you do together, then you have a success, right? Yeah. Because there isn't just one way of doing this. There's just, it all really depends on the culture of the organization. And I teach class on approaches to journey mapping. And they're truly, I was doing an interview with Forrester at one point, and Tony asked me this question. He said, well, how do you know which direction to go or what's important to a particular company? And I thought about it and said, I have no idea. And I realized that because I've been a consulting puke for a lot of years, that I automatically kind of take that information in. And if you're a CPG or a pharmaceutical company, heavily brand driven, right?
Right.
You have one approach that is diametrically different than the people who have lots of customer data that have customer files like finance, telco, right? Mm-hmm. That they have all this data about their customer that the brand folks don't have. So one comes from all these analytics and the other comes from all the soft storytelling. And they both have to end up in the middle to get human-centered design, but how they get there is really different. So it's really fun to look at that from your organization's perspective and put your feet in there, put our feet in your shoes.
Yeah, no, I like your points. Those are really good. Took some notes on value mapping and customer journey mapping, combining those two thought processes. So,
anybody else want to jump in on that? Do you know what your personality of your company is so that you can kind of step up and tweak that? I see Rosa smiling. Because it really is, it's child psychology. All of what, if I'm a psychology major, couldn't get a job, so I went into marketing. So this is a really good technique to help people get together on a particular subject, right? So we call this a statement of intent, right? And starting kind of broadly, if you say, well, gee, what is our vision? What are our values? What are goals? What is our brand promise? Generally, it's like in the lobby or it's on the front of the internet, right? It's pretty easy for most people to grab a hold here of what the executives are saying is what am I telling the world, right? So the next question is, well, what differentiates you from your competition with this, right? And don't tell me it's your people, right? Because everybody says it's their people, right? Tell me specifically. And again, if you want a copy of this little workshop, it's got about 6 slides in it, and it's really fun to do. So then what differentiates you? Well, that's interesting. So is your brand defined actually in the minds of your customers? How did you get that information from your mind into their mind? Is that something that you're doing on your website? Is that something you're doing in your call center? How do you get this information in, right? If you want to be a little bit of goofy because you're a startup, what's your personality, right? How are you sharing this information other than, we love you and we bring good things to life, right? Well, that's fine. But more specifically, what are you doing? And then finally, at every single touch point, are you actually making this happen? And how are you making it happen? So one of the final questions in this little linkage thing is, how will I know I'm successful? So the first one is, do I know what my vision is? The second one is, how is that articulated? The third one is, how am I getting that information to my customers? how often, and how well. And finally, what are they reading back to me to say I've been successful? So doing this as a little workshop is always enlightening for everyone. Any comments? Have you done something like this? Really fun to do. And again, if you're new in an organization, your first 30 days, it's always fun to run around the executives and the key managers and say, can you define customer experience? And you will probably get a different definition from every single one of them, which is an opportunity, right? Bring people together around a few definitions. And there's no wrong one, right? Unless you're saying the customer doesn't matter. We make a great product. They're all going to come to us because we have a great product. Which makes you a really great opportunity for disintermediation. So again, having feedback loops from customers and employees with relational surveys, transactional surveys, in-moment surveys. Surveys are really helpful. Now, sadly, they're, in my humble opinion, you see how humble I am already, we're over surveying. We are leaning on the crutch of voice of the customer and net promoter score so hard that we are turning off the population of people who were somewhat interested in helping us into go away. I'll give you a 10 and go away, whether I'm happy or not, because you're going to chase me around if I give you anything less than a 10. I actually was in an elevator of a Marriott Residence Inn in a city not to be mentioned 2 weeks ago. In the elevator, there was a sign that says, when you get the survey, a 9 or a 10 is the only appropriate answer. If you're going to give us something less than a 9 or a 10, do not answer the survey or come to the front desk so we can get something resolved. That was a little bit of a help, but right, this was in the elevator framed by the management. Talk about wrong, wrong, wrong. It is the result of someone getting paid for something they probably don't have a whole lot of control over. So surveys are good, but they should be pointed, preferably by life cycle element, and chart. So that, because you actually should know already what's working well and what's not. So every time I get a survey from this hotel chain, they ask me 30 questions, half of which is, was the room clean? Well, they know whether or not the room was clean or not, right? Did the phone get answered immediately? They know whether or not the phone was answered. So why are they asking me these questions over and over again? I stay in a hotel 200 nights a year, or did, right? So looking at your data gives you a really good opportunity to start zeroing in on what's working and what's not from a doing, thinking, feeling perspective. And then it does an even better job to really understand whether or not what you're trying to achieve is actually being reflected back from the customer's perspective. So how many folks are doing just voice of the customer and net promoter score without much else from a segmentation or a reverse data analysis? You just think that to yourself. You don't have to admit it, right? But leaning on, again, interestingly enough, the book Good to Great, there's not a single company in business. So all of that wonderful good to great and net promoter score, they all have been disintermediated or disrupted. So having the data is interesting. What you do with it is more important. How many of you are doing some type of, now this, Mark and Igor, come back to what you were saying, the new hit words is smart loop and closed loop feedback, right? So you get a bad report or a low net promoter score. What do you do about it? Oh no, I got a low score. And you move on. Or is there a program in place to understand, acknowledge, first of all, I've got a great Hill of Anger project, acknowledge to that person we failed you, say, oh gee, this is a problem that we've seen, we are working on it, and let us tell you when we fixed it. more broadly, let people in user groups, especially in B2B, know that there's a problem, that you respect the fact that they told you that, and here's what you're doing about it. And then make that change to show that root cause is fixed. This is where the rubber meets the road, and where CX teams can be really valuable, because you can now provide the information, especially if it's happening like in another department. Again, in B2B, it's a lot easier because customer success knows all the problems, or hopefully and can act on them. But in B2C, really understanding why your lead generation isn't working so well, because your UX at the back end isn't working so well, right? Or your execution isn't working so well, or your product isn't working so well. Now understanding and laying it out for the executives makes you really valuable.
I have a question about the previous slide that you mentioned. You said you have a lot of experience staying in hotels. So, and you mentioned that it's really bad to over-survey customers, and I agree as a customer, and basically, we all are customers, and we all got surveys in one point of our lives. And so, but back to your hotel stay experience, you mentioned that they know that the room was clean or not. So usually,
they should.
Usually, what is because I'm thinking, is there an objective metrics that says the room is clean, and that is clean by definition of everyone? Because it's subjective sometimes based on what you consider to be clean. Give you an example. If you walk into the room and the room has been vacuumed, the sheets have been made, everything is clean, but the room smells awful because they put tons of chemicals into the room. The windows are not open because of many hotels don't open the windows. You walk into the room and you walk into the chemical factory. Now, is the room clean? Yes, the room is clean. Is your experience staying in the room good? Depends. If you don't care about living in the chemical factory, that's fine. But if you care about your stay, that's not. Now, a lot of people don't do that, don't report that unless they're so frustrated. So majority of people are not going to go to Google and say, hey, I walked into this and it was horrible. So how do you as a company know what to fix and how to fix it?
Okay, so there's two parts to that. Part number one is, if I'm a platinum elite and I've stayed in a Marriott 200 nights and all of them are clean based on the same benchmark, you might not need to ask me that question, or you ask me a more open-ended question of what could I do differently for that. If so you get that difference of one, if you asked me 30 times already, right, the same question. If the company has benchmarks of what they consider clean, and then they validate that over time with people, then that is answered. What question might you ask that's different than, is your room clean, right? In a smaller set of questions that might answer that question, right? Did the room meet your expectation, or is there anything that you might ask that, or is there anything we could do to improve your experience of the room presentation, right? Then you'll get the answer you're looking for, right?
But then you go back to surveying them, and that's maybe.
Well, a survey, remember, there's two pieces. There's survey fatigue of, do you have to answer every single question every single time? And quality of survey question, which is getting to the root opportunity to improve the experience. So people don't mind answering some questions, especially if it's all about them, but they do mind getting asked the same question over and over and over, especially if they answer it and nothing changes.
Okay, thanks.
Does that, no, well, no, it doesn't sound like it helped. Again, fortunately, there's a lot more technology now with natural language programming and AI and a few other things that you can ask more open-ended questions rather than Likert scale questions. You know what a Likert scale is? Almost always, you know, that set of 5 questions. If you can ask an open-ended question about how can I improve the room experience, then you're going to say it's full of chemicals and I was very uncomfortable because it smelled awful, as compared to, is the room clean?
Right, it makes sense. Just a really quick comment. You mentioned the word a couple of times, and the word digital was mentioned as basically an association with this. In my mind, the UX originally did not mean to be DUX, digital UX. It meant to be user experience. It actually, in my mind, the UX in itself meant to be what CX is trying to be right now. So it never meant to concentrate on digital aspects. Like if you walk into the store and if you and you get these products back from the store and then you receive some kind of hello, how was your blah blah blah, that's UX. So and then the UX somehow became associated with just or mostly digital experiences.
Yeah, with that whole digital, yep, that whole digital transfer.
Exactly.
Ahead,
so now we have another cute term, CX, and another X, and another X, and another X. So there's so many X's. It's almost like, you know, but anyway, so that's just one.
No, you're right. You're right. User experience has now been pretty much relegated to mobile and web. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. I was at the Forrester event just last week, and Brandon got up and said, you know, AI is going to kill the web, because if you go to ChatGPT or OpenAI, and I've downloaded I'm playing with it, it actually gave me a haiku on Sweet CX last week. It was hysterical. But it doesn't have any ads. It doesn't have all the stuff that all of the social media and web browsers have anymore. And now I prefer it when I ask a question, because I don't get all that sponsored stuff. So it's going to have its own X pretty soon, because someone's going to have to figure out how to monetize it. But yeah, user experience really has been funneled into digital experience nowadays, as compared to how someone approaches and utilizes a particular product or service, which is the broader experience there, as compared to the customer's experience, which also adds in some more thinking and doing. So that's a really great point. And that's harder to deduce with the survey. You can deduce some of it with focus groups and actually looking at you know, user.com and other tools that allow you to really analyze what someone is doing as they interact with not only a digital platform, but also, you know, most retailers, the bigger ones, actually have cameras in the store, and they see where you're walking around, and they understand the flow. And Walmart and all of the bigger segment and data-driven companies really do a great job of understanding product flow as well, right? I mean, this is the level of complexity of the human mind is pretty amazing. So we're just kind of scratching the surface when we ask these questions of folks.
I really appreciate, this is Josh, by the way, and appreciate been listening in. Valerie, I noticed there's a common thread that is continuing. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you weren't hearing me. I think there's a common thread where there's a discussion around metrics and both a conflation of either having too much data, not enough intelligence, as well as a relationship factor where there's not a lot of connectivity about like what we're trying to measure, to the point, you know, around NPS. There's literally, it seems like there's people today like with pitchforks, you know, just storming against NPS saying, you know, we're going to get rid of it. And I'm like, well, there's probably just a misunderstanding of the value of what NPS or other metrics need to apply, and then it needs to be more of a blended model, obviously. But in that dialogue, then it also ultimately impacts the outcomes of what we're either trying to build, develop, create, define within those experiences. And I especially loved your discussion earlier around, teams, CX teams being connected with UX and vice versa. I've had some recent discussions as well where people are like, well, it's either one or the other. Like you shouldn't be discussing them both. And so I find it surprising because I think there should be a greater understanding, because that CX should be informing a product and vice versa. Those product metrics should also be informing the CX. But I think it's just really interesting, and I just don't know where you could possibly start. I know each organization is very unique in that, but I think there needs to be greater conversations regardless about what are we measuring and where and how, because we could just be leading ourselves astray in what we're either trying to develop or measure on.
Yeah, absolutely. And people do what they're measured and paid for. So it is a very powerful weapon, right? And that's, again, everybody has an opinion, right? So that's where I think some of the scores that CX has embraced, the CX meaning CXPA, and a number of organizations have embraced effort, Net Promoter Score, and CSAT, almost to the exclusion of other data. And the challenge there is then that drives the surveys, that drives the analysis, that drives the metrics that they get paid on, which is a self-fulfilling hole that you get into, right? And again, the correlation between those and revenue, acquisition, retention, and growth are less clear than other metrics that other departments are driving. So I have I'm doing the lifetime value class, but I've developed what I'll call economic drivers, which is not like just me. There's a whole practice around levers and drivers that impact CX. So what you're looking at here is a very generic one around, world-class experience, which is really understanding your customer from a 360 viewpoint, what they're doing, their thinking, their feeling, their needs, their value, and their behaviors. And then you have goals. Those turn into objectives, drivers, and then the value creation, right? And then even further, typical metrics here tie to CX, right? There's business metrics, revenue metrics, value, pure customer experience, right? Insight and sales. And there's some really interesting ones around. I always like, especially in B2B, to do a business shrinking growing study. So give me your top 20% of customers and tell me year over year over the last 3 years, did they grow or shrink from a revenue perspective? And then give me what their metrics, whatever metrics you've got. Is it Net Promoter Score? Is it CSAT? Is it a vulnerability score? All metrics welcome. And what you start seeing is a somewhat disturbing trend of the last 2 years, and I don't know that it's COVID doing this, is that they've decoupled. Some of your fastest shrinking best customers still have 9s and 10s on their Net Promoter Score. So your job is to figure out why that's happening, right? So that tied to Josh, just what you're saying here is that, I'm kind of old fashioned in that these metrics here have been around since dirt. And if we figure out how to put ourselves in the shoes of the metrics that others value, then we're going to do a much better job of being able to influence them and the business.
I appreciate that, Valerie, and your earlier slide there, the one before that, I also really love it. It helps validate a little bit of my thinking earlier and some of the work that I also drew from some Forrester work, but it really does connect a nice relationship. In many ways, it also kind of points to some hierarchical thinking I had mentioned on Wednesday during the talk at the very end, which was just talking, and I talked about it very quickly, but just connecting moments in a relationship to both your your beacon goals, or as you have those goals, as well as those touch point and performance drivers. So I really love this slide because it does a nice job of illustrating the key hierarchical relationships that should be ideally uh, measured out and evaluated and continuously improved. So I really appreciate you sharing this.
Oh, thank you. I have another one. I don't think I put in here on levers, but I can throw it in and share it with you. Again, there's an ecosystem, right? We all get really focused in on our department or our thing that we do, and we forget that, well, first of all, I'm just a total sucker for statistical segmentation, right? Understand the value of the customer, their behavior, both their buying behavior and their needs, and what they're trying to do, it keeps them up at night, right? And then their needs. And if you keep your finger on that pulse, and companies like Cisco and TIAA really keep their finger on the pulse of the customer. And because they do that, they are always ahead of the game and don't get disrupted. Whereas the ones that forget that they have customers, either because they're in the shiny object phase of their product, like a lot of automotive companies are now, or if they think their product is so good that it can't be disintermediated, they're just waiting to be slapped down. So I haven't been keeping my eye on time, Mark, but again, this all comes from a combination of data, which it can be emotional, rational, or quantitative, or right, and just kind of keeping your finger in all the time, right? So what we do in CX is often most closely aligned to marketing, sales, and service, because those are the more human things we do. And not everybody wants to have an experience the same way. And interestingly enough, with digital transformation, not everybody wants to be digitally transformed, right? I want whatever I want that's in front of me at the moment, whether it be a mobile device, a computer, or a walk-in. And I expect the company to follow me around and figure out what they're doing. People like LL Bean get all of my retail business because they do that. And they make it so easy for you to buy that why would I go somewhere else and make it hard for myself, right? That's the kind of quote unquote loyalty you want. You make it hard to go away because, and in every industry, you can do that, right? When I walk up to God forbid, an ATM, right? It says, Valerie, do you want the $40 you've wanted the last 16 times you came to this ATM? Just give me the $40 and then ask me if I want something else, right? We have the technology to do this type of thing, right? So marketing tends to listen to that because they do tend to be a little bit more, left-brained as well as right-brained, right? So helping them understand the key moments of truth and pain points in the company that they're working in helps them, because they oftentimes get disentangled from that. They're doing campaigns, right? CRM data, really understanding the data and enhancement so that you can help get to the next product is really important for them. Aligning their channel strategy. I laughingly say when I get on a plane, I help people see where they're abusing customers so they can stop. And that usually happens between departments and across channels. Departments and channels are really great to be silos and vertically oriented, but they're not so good at looking left and right to the people that are serving them. So making sure that this happens, and there's a lot to be said for compensating everyone for working together as compared to being brilliant and independent.
And Valerie, I have a question really quick. What is it about LB that makes it easier for you and make you stay with them?
Okay, well, I'll give you an example. I was going on a big trip and I could only have a 8-pound bag. And so I needed some stuff that was really high tech that you could just wash out in the sink overnight. So no one ever needed to know I only had 2 pairs of pants for 18 days. So I had 1 pair of pants that I really liked that they offered. And I got online and found out that that pair of pants was out of stock. Who knew? Because it's so popular. So I called because I couldn't find it online. And the call center rep said, "Hey, Valerie, how are you? How are you liking the pants that you bought last?" And I said, "I love them, but I need another pair in tall and I can't find them." And he said, "Well, let me help you." And he said, "Well, the store here and the store there both have 1 pair each of those long. Let me send a message right now and hold them to make sure that they have them. I see them in inventory. And would you like them shipped to one or the other or both shipped to your house?" And I said, "Well, I'll take both." And he said, "Great." He said, "One of the stores is closed because it's on the West Coast. You should get an email from the store and Ryan should send you that email saying when it's going to get delivered, right? Because he might have to package it. I want to just make sure it's good." And he said, "Great." He said, "When the other store opens, you'll get another email in a couple hours." And I said, "Yeah, right." Couple hours later, I got an email from the people in the other store in California and said, "Hey, Valerie, we've got your package for you. We're going to ship it to you free because we love you so much." So that's an experience that's really hard to beat. Not only did they know where their product was, they went out of their way, not really, if it was all on the system, to know whether or not that product, where it was available. And then they knew who I was and where to ship it to. And then they added the little thing of, "We love you, we're shipping it for free."
So with the exception of this last touch, which was like, we love you and thank you for shopping with us, what you described to me is not really extraordinary from their part. So
No.
meaning, I'm not saying they didn't do the good job. I'm saying they did what, it's not a miracle to know where the product is. So are you saying that the customer experience differentiation lies in small things that should have been done by default rather than coming to like lofty goals or something like that? Because what they've done is what they should have done, basically.
Yeah, but now how many of those companies actually do that?
That is true. What I'm saying is basically it doesn't have to be extraordinary. It has to be just right.
It just has to be that. My expectation was that they were going to do what 90% of the stores like Land's End and Sears and all the ones that have gone under, to say, "Well, gee, I don't know what's at your local store, but you could go see or call your local store and see whether or not they have it, or drive down to your local store and see if they have it," which they wouldn't have had it. And the local store, if I was in the local store, may have seen an inventory because they weren't really omni-channel somewhere else, but they would have to then call them and wait online to see if somebody could run over and see if the stock was there. And they wouldn't know who I was and they wouldn't know who to send it to. That is probably 90% of retail today, even with all the amazing technology that's out there.
Valerie.
So literally what customer expectation I had was so far lower than that the bar is really low, and yet it's not met.
Valerie, can you expand on the bullet where it says limiting CRM data and enhancement spend? I'm trying to understand the context of how it's written under as a
it was probably too cryptic here. So the CRM data that is available in most companies and accessible and then usable is pretty limited, right? So that, people, big data, interestingly enough, everybody's SQL databases before we got to data lakes were only used about 20%. So the ability to get a hold of that data in a CRM database probably lies with maybe 3 or 4 people, even in a company like Macy's or someone like that. And then getting the ability to enhance that data, meaning to append it with demographic and psychographic information, to tag it with segment data, to tag it with, once you've got a segment and you know who that customer is, and if they're a best customer, tag it with treatment data. So a call center person would be able to pull it up and say, oh, Valerie's a high lifetime value customer, and we should treat her because she's Samantha Senior. She tends to be phone oriented as compared to mobile oriented, where Molly Millennial would want to text. So if you know my preferences, you know my segment, you know what I bought before, and you know my value, now you know as the person in front of me, whoever that is, or the channel in front of me, how to be treated.
Okay, so in summary, I think when you're saying limiting is access, quality, enrichment falls into most of those buckets.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, I got too cryptic there. Sorry. We talked about mapping. Again, it's visualization of information is often very helpful. I poo-pooed it for a very long time, but you can, what is it? Napoleon's March to Russia is the classic example everyone uses to understand what people are thinking, feeling, and doing by, again, as discrete a group as you can. Segments give you a really good view of a group of people who have common information at a low enough level to be differentiated, but at a high enough level to be profitable. So really, you know, on this map on the left here is I lovingly call it the I love it, I hate it map. This is someone trying to pay for their parents' insurance online. And it has data from a clickstream perspective. It has what someone's thinking and feeling and doing as they go through. And it's got some cute little images here about how frustrated she is with the Harvey balls. You can calculate, in this, we've calculated effort, net promoter score, and satisfaction. And again, it looks like a pretty terrible experience here when you calculate it from left to right. And where you need to work is really clearly delineated. So if you put this in front of a group of people and say, you know, everybody here has a piece of this pain. The IVR is here, it's painful. The call center rep's ability to service the customer is painful. The fact that they had to send something in snail mail is painful, right? And they started out here with pretty high expectations. So in this particular case, the pain was well spread around. In this case here, this is an example of an experience that many of us who travel have, right? You're on your way to the airport and you get the text saying your flight is canceled, right? So then you get there, you look at the line, oh my God, the kiosks are down. And so what do? You stand in line because that's backup. You get on the phone, you call the call center, and you get on your mobile app. So now I'm not using one, I'm using 3 different channels and clogging them up. And then finally, you know, I go have a cup of coffee and I really get hyper caffeinated and angry. And finally, I get one of these channels finally responds and they put me on the next flight. Now, I fly to the same spot every week. Right? We do projects that are 6 months long. All they would have had to do in the text to say, would you like the 10 o'clock flight or the 11 o'clock flight? Push the button and that entire experience would have gone away. And everybody looks at that and say, we never thought of that. Right? So doing a map is very helpful because it shows you all sorts of interesting information. Comments, questions? And again, I showed this before, right? It's an ecosystem, right? Understanding your customer, what they're thinking, they're feeling, they're doing, what their expectations are, focusing in on them, right? Because I think it was Mark or Carl, one of you said something to the effect of, all customers are equal. No, they're not. Sadly, we have limited resources and we have limited time. And so really understanding and spending time with your best customers and then your next best customers that should be best customers, but for some reason they're not, are going to put the most money in the bank, which is what everyone cares about. Now, it doesn't mean people get bad experiences because they're less, but they don't necessarily get as much focus to give them great experiences. And then really the most important customer is the ones that you want to fire. Those are the ones who are never going to be happy with your product. It's a bad fit, or they're just never going to be happy. And you have the opportunity there to gently say, why don't you go to my competitor? They can help you. And that is a really successful way to add 10% to your bottom line if you do it gently than anything else we've done today.
You know what, Valerie, I would chime in here. I used to do on my birthday, we had hundreds of clients in mystery shopping. And every year I would just say to the staff, you guys can kind of choose a client to fire every year. And on my birthday, I'm going to call that client and guide them gently to another source. Every time I did that, 5 clients would take their place.
Yeah, because you got time to do the thing, and it works every time. Now, again, if you're missing a hole in the market and you're losing customers because you don't have the right product, that's a strategic decision that you say, are we going to fix this product, change this product, or are we just going to say we don't have this product? So it's really hard. And the other thing that's really hard is big does not mean profitable. I was fortunate enough to learn that when I was just a baby at Pacific Bell, and one of the banks was a $40 million customer, and every year we were below water with them because what they demanded was just irrational. And they cost us about $60 million to make 40. And everyone kept saying, but they're our biggest customer. And I kept saying, but they're not profitable. Unless we can make them profitable, send them somewhere else. And that's really hard for people to do. So again, this ecosystem is really important. And we can be the group that kind of slides under the radar and does this because we do have a remit that's company-wide as compared to the sales worrying whether or not lead generation is theirs or marketing's and all that. You can start bringing people together and have them collaborate around the experience, the user experience, channel experiences, product experiences, right? And look at both emotional and operational data and just make recommendations on the low-hanging fruit. And that is something that people will start appreciating. If you let the sun shine on them as well as you taking a lot of credit, people figure out pretty quickly who's doing what. So one of the other things that is kind of interesting that I see a lot of organizations with the name either CX or UX forget about is the fact that you've done all this homework already, understanding what the right timing and cadence and the touch points that are the most impactful. And if you share that information with the campaign teams and make their campaign orchestration improved, you're immediately a hero. And you can use the same tools as you're using for CX, for campaign orchestration, for messaging, right? For user experience, we talked about that. Just laying some of this information out so that it can be consumed by different groups makes you a hero. And then again, your 2 hardest nuts, the money guy and the strategy guy or woman, hopefully in half of these, if you can help them drive their business benefits, help them tie it to longer term growth, because again, retention and growth are 4 times more profitable than acquisition. And do it with not a whole lot of drama and a whole lot of money. You will be loved by your CEO and CFO, right? Understanding why customers are returning or not. And again, this is what keeps them up every night. So creeping up the ladder to help them understand it only can benefit you. Make sense? Prioritizing things is really important. This is another really great exercise of once you've kind of collected a lot of information about things that you could do, getting a SWAT team of everybody in the organization that is impacted into nowadays I do it in a survey because of COVID or in a webinar and a poll, but it works best still face to face. There's some things that work really well face to face, and doing a prioritization exercise of what we should do now, what we should do next, what we should do later, and what most importantly we should do not is really, really helpful. And impact to customer, impact to company, feasibility, and cost are pretty well-trod things, but getting your finance team to help you clarify that so that it ties to IRR and all of that, really, again, it engages them and it makes them understand the fact that you're not just a pretty face. And then finally, again, getting to a roadmap, time being the most important thing of all of this. How much time do I have to get things done? Now you can start passing this information off. Now in CX, I also always recommend that, if you've got more than you as a team, that you have some small PMO function that you can kind of keep your finger in on some of the things that you're doing, especially the ones with the most impact from a moment of truth perspective, so that you can then make sure that people stay on track. When I used to do a lot of work in consulting and especially in engineering and databases and marketing systems, one of the requirements I always had at the beginning of a consulting project was that they let me stay in at least 10% of my time until they got something implemented, because people always have questions around, well, what does the customer really need here? And if that chair is empty from their perspective, they make it up. And they always make it up, sadly, of what they want, not what the customer needs. So being involved throughout the entire implementation process is really important. And I know this sounds like an incredibly great amount of stuff to do, but you can start small. And again, look at what's the most important thing for that particular experience, and then just start pairing them off that way. If you only do one project well in 6 months and it's a success, that's plenty. One of the things you can help your IT team do is identify and get the support tools that you identify that are, again, supportive of the whole company. And oftentimes, people forget the fact that, things like the CRM system, the voice of the customer system, journey orchestration, analytics, these are all tools that are shared by everyone. They're not necessarily just in your own backyard. So helping your teams get other tools that they need, again, endears you to them very quickly. Greg, you came on. Are you going to ask a question? No? Okay. Help HR embrace CX and EX. Carl and Mark were talking about this a lot in the last session, right? It's am I enabling my employee to do the job I'm asking them to do? Not do they wake up every morning happy and cheering. I mean, that would be nice, but they will do that, right? But understanding the synergy between, can I enable them to do the job and empower them to do the job, is important. And in most companies, this is another little golden question, is once you've done one or the other, CX or EX, an enlightened C-level will say, why am I not doing both? Because oftentimes when we do work, we find out that there's kind of 3 buckets at the end. There's the moments of truth and pain points from the customer's expectations and needs. There's the moments and truth and pain points from the company perspective. And then there's the ones that are both, right? So when I say moments of truth and pain points for a company or an employee, is I have 16 different screens on my call center, or I have 4 regulatory groups and all of them argue among themselves of what things I need to do for privacy. Can you please give me one answer? Well, that doesn't necessarily directly impact a customer. It makes me as an employee miserable because I'm figuring it out for the customer, but they never see that, right? So those are great Six Sigma projects. They're great streamlining projects. Getting rid of those helps the employees. The ones around the expectations purely from a customer perspective, some of those you can impact, some of those you can't. Some of them would require an enhanced product set. All of that's interesting. But the ones that affect them both are the low-hanging fruit. So you can kind of organize things and work on the middle one first, then the ones that are pain points for customers, and as quickly as possible, shift off the other stuff to the groups that are responsible. Make sense? I think I'm getting to the end. I think I used too many slides. Change management. Again, if you have a change management group, they're really great to be able to figure out how to get things done because they are the child psychology of companies. We talked about metrics, and I have more on metrics than you ever want to know. So we can do a metrics. Benefit statements, again, if you can help cross-sell, you can help operations improvement, you can directly impact churn and decrease regulatory risk. All of these things are really important. Again, when I was working at AT&T, interestingly enough, the board member who was assigned so that I wouldn't go off the ranch told me one day, he said, you know, everything you do from a monetary perspective is great, but it's a rounding error. But if you can help us with the PUC to get them to approve new products that we want to do, you're golden. It's like, I never thought of that, right? So depending on the business you're in, if you're in Comcast, making the regulatory people happy might be a lot more impactful to a lot of people than adding another 0.5% on a particular region. Questions? Okay, I'm done. I've got a bunch more things in the back of this, and Mark, I'll send you critical success factors and a bunch of things, but I always overdo.
Well, this has been super. Does anyone have any other questions that maybe weren't covered at all? Anything out there that's kind of outstanding you'd like to chat about? Brilliant.
Was this helpful?
Questions?
You were very quiet Friday afternoon. I don't know if this was TMI or was it useful?
I think it was terrific. So I will be sending the presentation to everyone where I have an email address. If you joined us through LinkedIn and I don't have your email address, if you didn't register on Eventbrite, then I won't know how to send it to you. So if you do want to get it and you did register or just joined through LinkedIn, please send me your email address and I'll make sure you get it. My email address is in the chat. And it is mark@cxforums.org. So if I have that.
We promise we won't spam you.
Yeah, you know, I try not to spam anything. Although it's a fine line between making people aware and spamming. I'm not really selling anything. I'm just like, here's something to be aware of. But anyhow, thank you so much, Valerie. I appreciate your time today and your energy in putting this together. And if anyone has any questions, please reach out to Valerie anytime as well. Sweet CX. By Question Pro. You can find her on Question Pro or at Sweet CX. I think it's Valerie.Peck@Question Pro.
Perfect.
Thanks, everyone. We'll be back at 1 o'clock Eastern, noon Central. Grab your lunch, have lunch together. I'm going to go down and let you know about the difference between research that we do to design experiences versus the research we do to measure an experience after the fact.
Ooh, cool.
Thanks much. See you in a little bit. I'm going to leave it open for anyone who wants to stay. And Val, you can cut off the recording now. I guess I'll do that.